Stop. 1, 2, 3.
Welcome to Training Camp Live, presented by Atlantic Health System.
Good morning, Jets Nation, and welcome into Training Camp Live, presented by Atlantic Health System. Right now we're getting a broad overlook of what the Jets are doing at practice. We'll see them a little bit later. But in today's show, we are coming to you from BetMGM Studio. Alongside Eric Allen, I'm Olivia Landis. And in today's show, we've got a lot of good stuff for you. We're going to start off by talking about some new additions that were added to the roster, an injury update, and then we'll hear from team reporter Ethan Greenberg. And later in the show, a special guest, SNY's Ralph Vacchiano. Yeah, I can't believe it, but this is the end of training camp. We're entering the last week of training camp. How unbelievable is that?
So I looked at the calendar this morning, and we're already into September. It is September 1. So that means 10 days away from the regular season opener 2020, the New York Jets and the Buffalo Bills. The Jets most recently were at MetLife Stadium on Sunday. They had a practice with some game-like situations. And then a walkthrough yesterday, going to ramp up today. They're in uppers, and we see them out there on the practice field right now. I believe that's Chris Hogan and Ashton Davis.
Well, happy September, everybody. You brought up a great point. I can't believe we're already in the month of September. Let's dive into today's headline presented by JetBlue. Over the past couple of weeks, we've talked about the lack of depth at the wide receiver position, mainly due to injuries. But within the last couple of days, the Jets have signed wide receivers Donte Moncrief and DJ Montgomery. Moncrief spent some time last season with both the Steelers and Panthers, and Montgomery was recently claimed off waivers from Cleveland. EA, what else can you tell us about this wide receiver duo?
Well, number one is the Jets have been practicing with 6 wide receivers, 6 healthy receivers, so they needed more numbers at the position just to have proper a proper practice. Donte Moncrief is a guy who's played 77 games in the National Football League, has 21 career touchdowns. Adam Gase had talked about he thinks Moncrief is going to pick up the system quick, and they just need more numbers because they're dealing with so many injuries at the position. Moncrief, if you remember, coming out of Ole Miss in 2014, he ran a 4.4, so he is another guy who fits the bill of somebody who can get down the field in a hurry.
Moncrief, who you just mentioned, actually spent all of last season on injured reserve because he sustained a hamstring injury during the preseason with Cleveland last year. With a wide receiver group that is already suffering from so many injuries, how important is it now to add 2 fresh faces to that unit?
Well, and let's talk about Montgomery a little bit here. He had 61 catches at Austin Peay for 1,025 yards. He averaged 16.8 yards a catch. He had a strong preseason for the Browns last year, but unfortunately went to injured reserve with a hamstring injury. It's just about getting guys reps and getting guys a proper rest. And you're hoping, knock on wood here, knock on glass, as we see Denzel Mims in the far back right there and Lawrence Cager. You're hoping there's Cager, Mims is number 11, Cager number 1. You're hoping those guys are closer to their returns. Adam Gase spoke on Sunday of, I'm hoping that we don't only get a few guys back, but we get a bunch of guys back very soon.
And something interesting about Moncrief, again, was actually team reporter Ethan Greenberg wrote about this, how just last week there was a highlight on Cleveland when he went up against cornerback Denzel Ward. So we know that he's got a lot of talent. He was battling for that second and third position at wide receiver because Cleveland is a team that has a lot of wide receiver depth. So it's really good to know that they're bringing in a couple of experienced guys who are also very talented.
Yeah, and the Cager, number 1, look at the size of him, 6'5". He's got that knee wrap on. He was making a number of plays before, unfortunately, he went down. Mims is a guy who was the only player in college football to have 8 touchdowns in each of the past 3 seasons. You're seeing a Jamison Crowder, who's had an excellent camp, made a number of receptions during the green and white practice over at MetLife Stadium. And there's a guy who continually gets overlooked a little bit, Braxton Berrios. He missed a couple of practices with for personal reasons, but he's had a tremendous camp, and he finished second in the NFL last year in terms of punt return average.
After a month of training camp, that means the regular season is just around the corner, as we had just discussed. With September also means that roster cuts are coming, unfortunately, soon. When we take a look at some of these dates, September 5th, that's only 4 days away, and that's when the roster gets cut down to 53 players.
Yeah, and you started camp because of COVID-19. You typically would have 90 players that started training camp. Well, NFL teams were dealing with 80 players, so you were already dealing with a reduced roster, and that's why injuries to certain positions became more magnified here in camp. But you mentioned cut down date. That is Saturday afternoon. You have to get down to 53 before 4 p.m. And then on Sunday, with the National Football League continuing to play or operate during this pandemic, that practice squad rosters are actually going to be increased from a maximum of 12 to 16. So a lot of guys on the roster bubble right now, they might not make that team, make that 53 cut down on Saturday. They could be right back on Sunday. Waiver claims across the National Football League. Teams are going to be scrambling for 24 hours from that cut down, not even less than 24 hours, between 4 p.m. Saturday, 12 p.m. Sunday. That's when you're going to have a bunch of waiver claims. So when we're talking about the Jets 53, not all of the Jets 53 who are going to be practicing on Monday are actually out there on the field. They're going to have some waiver claims. We'll have to see what the numbers are and how that checks out.
Well, really quickly, how much is this roster going to change within the next couple of days? We know that it's just 4 days away from roster cuts, but how much of an impact is this roster really going to have?
Well, 80 to 53, just for sheer numbers, you're looking at close to 30 people that you're going to be releasing. And the Jets are constantly making moves. You're seeing them have waiver claims. We talked about the receiver. They just had a claim on yesterday. We're going to talk to Ethan Greenberg about a defensive back that they just claimed as well. So roster turnover is part of the deal at this time of year. And it's tough for NFL front offices because these guys work very hard during the off season. You have your virtual springs, and then they come out here and put their best foot forward, and then you got to move on, and that's part of life in the National Football League. So, for NFL front offices, I think most of the guys, say 20 guys, well, you know who's going to be out of here by the time Saturday comes around, but there are going to be 7 to 10 guys right on that roster bubble.
It's time for today's Field Pass presented by Toyota. Recently, the team's kicking battle became a little bit more slim following the Jets' practice scrimmage this past Sunday. Let's now head down to the field to team reporter Ethan Greenberg, who has more on that kicking situation. Ethan, good morning. What can you tell us about the kicking situation?
Good morning, Liv. Yeah, things got a little more crystallized here on the field. Brett Maher was released from the team yesterday, which leaves Sam Ficken as the only kicker on this Jets roster, as opening day is less than 2 weeks away. And Brant Boyer said earlier this month that he was going to place a heavy emphasis on scrimmages, on game-like situations when evaluating his kickers and his entire special teams unit. Well, Sunday's green and white practice, Sam Ficken went 4 for 4, 33, 41, 48, and 52 yards. Brett Maher went 2 for 4, and that's not the only reason I would assume that Brett Maher is no longer with the New York Jets. Brant Boyer said that they were charted, Ficken and Maher were charted on essentially every kick, every day, even if they weren't necessarily kicking here on the practice field, but they could be practicing on the turf field, charting those kicks, kickoffs. There's a whole laundry list of different kicks that they were being charted on. And looking ahead now, Sam Ficken kicked with the Jets 15 games last season, connected on 70.4% of those. He had a game-winning 44-yard field goal over the Miami Dolphins as time expired in Week 14 at MetLife Stadium. But this doesn't necessarily mean that Sam Ficken is the Jets' Week 1 starter. You think about this time last year, the Jets made a waiver claim. You guys were talking about the timeline. The Jets made a waiver claim last season. That was Corey Vedvik. That experiment did not work out. Then the Jets brought in Ficken, who finished the season for them. Not necessarily meaning Sam Ficken is the guy week 1, but it sure looks like he could be, and there's a good chance that he will be.
The bottom line at this point, Ethan, is Sam Ficken is a more accurate kicker than Brett Maher. Last year in Dallas, Maher was 1 of 5 from kicks between 40 and 49 yards, and then he's got the leg, but just 4 of 8 from 50-plus yards. So Sam Ficken did some good things for the Jets last season, and it looks like he is in line to be the kicker opening day in Buffalo. All right, I want to shift from special teams a little bit to another roster move.
Okay.
Joe Douglas continues to be busy. Yesterday afternoon, the Jets claimed a defensive back off waivers from Arizona. What can you tell us about this new addition?
So that's Zane Lewis, who the Jets claimed yesterday. I don't think he's out here because I would assume he'd have to go through the COVID protocols, but I'm not sure exactly what the fine writing is. If you go through the protocol on another team and then you get claimed by another, but he does have to travel, so I assume he has some tests to take, similar to Dante Moncrief, who is a free agent. But Zane Lewis, undrafted free agent, signed with the Arizona Cardinals, went to college at Air Force, 37 games, 94 tackles, had 2 interceptions in his career, led the team with 15 pass defenses last season, and he joins a cornerbacks room that's banged up right now with Brian Poole, who actually is dressed today, and we saw that Sunday, though, so I wonder if he'll ramp up his reps. Maybe we'll get to see him in team period for the first time, but Zane Lewis, maybe this is a guy the Jets liked and wanted to claim him before this weekend rolls around, EA.
Thank you to team reporter Ethan Greenberg, who is on the field for our Field Pass segment presented by Toyota. We'll hear from him a little later on in the show. But now let's dive into training camp injury update presented by Atlantic Health System. A couple of new names, some names that aren't on the list anymore, but one of the newest names added to this list, rookie running back LaMichael Pirine, who did sustain an ankle injury this past Sunday in the practice and scrimmage that the Green and White had at MetLife Stadium. The head coach Adam Gase said he would really expect a lot of these guys on this list to come back in bunches these coming weeks.
You mentioned Pirine. That's so unfortunate because he was having an impressive camp. He had a 70-plus yard scoring run. The Jets' first scrimmage here at One Jets Drive. He's a natural pass catcher, more explosive than you would anticipate just looking at his 40-yard time. He made a catch out of the backfield Sunday at MetLife Stadium and then was pulled down from behind. We're looking at the 2 veteran running backs right there in Le'Veon Bell and Frank Gore. But there are some numbers, we talked about wide receivers having numbers. We're getting some, I'm getting Ethan Greenberg just sent a message to me out there on the field. I'm trying to look at that right now. But the running backs, a little bit thin themselves right now because Pirine goes out with the ankle, and then Josh Adams is dealing with the hamstring issue as well. So maybe Adams, is that Adams right now actually? And we're talking about Pete Guerrero could possibly be back in the rotation. Let's see what Ethan said here. The ankle sprain for
Pirine?
Yes, Michael Pirine. I'm sorry, we're trying to get the information as it comes to us from Ethan Greenberg.
Well, let's now head back down to the field. We're going to hear from SNY's Ralph Vacchiano, who is standing by live on the field. Ralph, good morning, and thank you so much for joining us today on Training Camp Live.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Ralph, you've been able to cover the Jets all of this training camp. When you immediately look at what has happened so far in this training camp, what stands out to you?
Well, the 2 things that keep jumping out to me, on the good side, the offensive line looks so much bigger, so much better. And I think that was an issue that we all had with the team last year, that you can't run an offense if you can't block up front. And they just got better guys, bigger guys. It looks to me more like a real professional line. That's the good. The other thing that jumps out is this receiving core is just falling apart with injuries. And you've got Jamison Crowder and I don't really know what else at this point. You hope Chris Hogan will be up to speed by then. You hope at some point Rashad Perriman and Denzel Mims will be back. But it was a thin core to begin with, and they just keep dropping every single day. That's not a good sign for Sam Darnold.
Ralph, I just got thrown off there for a little bit because we were talking about the running backs, and they're getting thin as well. But it sure looks like right now Josh Adams is at least participating in individual drills, and that's a positive for the Jets because beyond Frank Gore, I mean Le'Veon Bell and Frank Gore, I mean the Jets need more numbers there as well.
Yeah, no question. It's definitely good news that he's back out on the field. There's hope, from what I understand, that LaMichael Pirine won't be a long absence, but that's all relative. There's, 12 days before the regular season opener at this point. You definitely need some depth because, remember, Frank Gore is 89, 90 years old at this point. So, you need to give him some, although he's fresher than all the rest of us. So, he's not going to be a guy you absolutely are sure is going to be there every minute. And you don't want to overwork Le'Veon Bell. That's been one of the themes that we've heard from Adam Gase is last year early on out of necessity, he basically abused Le'Veon Bell, ran him even though there were situations where he knew he was going to take a pounding. He doesn't want to do that, and that's going to take more than just one guy as a backup.
Ralph, besides the offensive side of the ball, let's now dive into the defensive side of the ball. A couple of positives there. We've seen a few players stand out so far this training camp. One that rings a bell, Quinnen Williams, the defensive lineman who is in his second season, came into training camp in what he says is the best shape of his life. What has stood out to you about his performance in training camp?
Well, he looks leaner. When you look at him, I'm not going to say that he was not in shape last year. He said that he did not feel in shape last year. He just looks like a different player, a different body type, and as a result, he seems faster. And that's what they want because he's more than just a guy you want as a big, run stopper who's going to clog the middle of the line. He was drafted that high because of his ability to get an interior pass rush, and that was supposed to help everyone. If he's a force on the inside, you have more room on the outside for Jordan Jenkins, more room on the outside for just about anybody. So that's good news that he does look like he's got a quicker first step. He's more comfortable. He talked earlier in camp about how last year he would look at the film and he wasn't processing things fast enough. That he would look at it later and say, okay, I knew I should have did this. Why didn't I do it? And that's kind of common for rookies where they're not getting the defense picking it up quick enough. And I think this year he is. We don't have the preseason games to know for sure, but in practice he looks more comfortable than I think we saw him at any point last season.
So many directions we could go here, Ralph, but 10 days out from the regular season opener, what do you anticipate seeing from the Jets opening day in Buffalo? I don't need a prediction, but we're talking about strengths and weaknesses. Do you get a feel for what this team wants to be or who it is right now?
It's hard to say without seeing them in an actual game. And again, looking at their offense with so many injuries, we talked about the running backs and the receivers. There's your skill guys. We don't know exactly how Adam Gase is going to run this offense. So, my suspicion is early on, until everybody's back healthy, they're going to be a defense-dominated team. That, especially if Quinnen Williams is better, Jordan Jenkins is motivated. They don't have Jamal Adams, obviously, but I think they probably have enough in Marcus May and Bradley McDougald to pick up there. Greg Williams worked a miracle with this defense last year, and if he can maybe do that again, and then early on, hopefully they can just eke out enough offense to stay competitive. And when they get everybody back, I do think that you could see this team be one that can score some points because Rashad Perriman looked terrific before he got hurt. We know what Jamison Crowder can do. This is going to be a big year for Sam Darnold. I have a lot of belief that he's going to be, if not an elite quarterback, really close to that level. He's got Chris Herndon back healthy, and he could be a very huge part of this offense as well. But right now, there are just so many holes and so many injuries. I think the defense is probably going to have to lead the way early on.
Huge thanks to SNY's Ralph Vacchiano for that insight down there on the field live. Something interesting that he said that stood out to me. He said he expects the Jets to be a very defense-dominated team this year, which does not surprise me because defensive coordinator Greg Williams and his entire defensive unit ranked 7th in the league overall as a defense.
Yeah, a lot of unknowns offensively because we're talking about the injuries at the wide receiver position and at running back. you're hoping Brashad Perryman gets back sooner than later. And remember, I would just pump the brakes on the expectations for Denzel Mims because he just hasn't practiced yet. The next step for him is just to get on the practice field and take part in football activities. So Perryman can give you some explosion on the outside. Chris Hogan has come in here and picked up the offense very well, developed a rapport with Sam Darnold. You like what you've seen out of the tight ends and the aforementioned running backs. I'm sorry I got caught up before because Ethan was telling us about Pirine and his ankle, but we saw Josh Adams be back, and that will help from a depth perspective. And defensively, Liv, you come to expect from Greg Williams that this unit is going to be stingy. They're going to get after the quarterback. They're going to play an aggressive style, and hopefully they can produce a little bit more takeaways in 2020.
We're actually now taking a look at some of the defensive backs, specifically the cornerback group over there getting some work in. We see a couple of guys that actually believe we saw 34, Brian Poole's in there getting some action in there, which is good to see because he was coming off of that injury. So now the cornerbacks getting some work in. A really solid group, a group that we've talked about a few times, but there is depth at that cornerback position.
Well, Poole is such a critical piece to this defense. We talk about him playing the nickel position, but he can go outside. He can line up as a linebacker. You saw at times last year, Greg Williams was sending Jamal Adams and Brian Poole towards the quarterback. He's a guy who can cover like a corner, but he's also is as physical as a linebacker. So he is a key part to this defense. Hopefully he can participate in team activities very soon. The other guy that we don't see out there right now for the New York Jets, and we haven't seen him throughout training camp, of course, has been number 35. That's Pierre Desir. Desir is a starter in the National Football League. He's got good ball skills, long and rangy. Unfortunately for the Jets, they've been working in camp without him as well. Blasan Austin, there he is, number 31 in your screen. I think he's had a very good camp. And then you're seeing different pieces get thrown into the mix, whether it be Nate Hairston or Arthur Millette. Guys are picking up valuable reps, but you still want to see that guy return because he is a big piece working there with Denard Wilson, the Jets defensive backs coach, of course.
Let's now dive into Hurry Up Offense. We've done this segment a couple of times before. We're going to bring in team reporter Ethan Greenberg, who is behind us. And the point of this game is we're going to have 3 different questions, 2 minutes on the clock to answer the questions. And we're actually going to start with EA first. Ethan, mic check, you good? Welcome in.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
We're
Happy to be back for the Hurry Up.
Wonderful. We're going to have EA go first, then you, and then me for this first question.
Okay.
Question number 1. As we all know, there are going to be no fans this year, which is kind of sad, but at the same time, necessary because of the pandemic that is going on. So when we think about this, how is this going to affect the game? No fans. EA, you're first.
Well, I was really struck. I don't know how both of you felt, but I was really struck by the comments from the players following Sunday's workout at MetLife Stadium. A bunch of guys talking about it being a weird feeling out there. Steve McClendon admitting that it's going to be really tough for him to play without fans. These guys are pros. They're going to make the adjustments, but it's not going to be the same. We've been watching what's been happening with the NBA and the NHL inside their own respective bubbles. I think at a certain point, ball is ball, but fans are definitely going to be missed no matter how much noise you pump into these stadiums.
All right, Ethan, you're next. Got 1 minute and 15.
Okay, yeah, I just think it's going to be eerie. And for me personally, I feel like I won't get a true sense of it until week 2 if we're at MetLife Stadium against the San Francisco 49ers. I think that's really when it would hit me most, when you actually see a game. But speaking of some of these guys, you're like, it's going to feel like a scrimmage in training camp, but they're going to be in game jerseys. I think it's going to be an eerie feeling for a lot of these players, even if it quite hasn't hit everybody yet.
Just like any other sport, you always hear the players talk about how important the fans are. And sometimes you might think, oh, they're just trying to get the fans going. But realistically, us all being at the stadium on game days, we know how important the fans are. The noise, the excitement, that really drives players sometimes to do better, or it drives them to get in that mode. So I do think it's going to be very interesting. It's unfortunate, but obviously it's necessary for health reasons because of the pandemic that is going on right now. But I'm interested to see as well, just like you guys said, I'm interested to see how this is going to affect the game. Hopefully it doesn't affect it too much, but we'll just have to find out. All right, question number 2. Ethan, we're actually going to go to you first this time. Who is your under-the-radar player, veteran player, this training camp?
So I'm going to go to the defensive side of the ball. I'm going to go up front, going with 96, Henry Anderson. I think Goose has had an impressive training camp. You think about his season last year, kind of hampered by that shoulder injury. He said that he learned the defense, then he got hurt, then he just never really was quite the same. Now he's 100%. That's a healthy, deep group up front, and I think that Henry Anderson has been very impressive so far in camp. I'm excited to see what he can bring in week 1 and throughout the course of the season.
I think that's a good one. I'm going to go next, and then EA, you can go after that. My under-the-radar vet, he has not been here long, I know that, but I'm going to go with wide receiver Chris Hogan. I think that he's a huge necessity in that wide receiver group, and we saw him really flash in the practice/scrimmage that the Jets had at MetLife Stadium. They closed on a Sam Darnold to Chris Hogan touchdown in the end zone, so I think he's going to be my under-the-radar vet. I have a feeling he's going to make a large impact on the offense this year. EA?
I'll go Frankie Luvu. He's a core special teams guy for Brant Boyer. He's played in 27 games the past 2 years for the Jets and racked up 4 sacks. He plays with his hair on fire. We saw him with an effective spin move on Mekhi Becton the other day. Unfortunately, he tackled LaMichael Pirine making a great hustle play, and we saw Pirine go down. But Luvu, to me, has been all over the field. He's seeing some first-team work in some packages. Again, that doesn't mean too much because Greg Williams employs so many different packages, but he has stood out to me as far as his explosion, getting around the quarterback, and he's always been solid against the run, and he's a valuable special teams player. So I think you got to watch Frankie Luvu as the regular season starts.
Ooh, you got it just in time. There was only 5 seconds left. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have on Training Camp Live, presented by Atlantic Health System. Big thanks to SNY's Ralph Vacchiano and, of course, our team reporter, Ethan Greenberg. We'll have more updates for you throughout the entire week. Just visit NewYorkJets.com or all of our social media platforms. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day.